Facial recognition is becoming inescapable. I'm Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic, and this is your deep dive of the week. Now, we're going to start with an article from The Verge by Steve Bonifield. And quite frankly, this is what really got me thinking about this. We're going to be talking about Discord, the internal chat, social media type platform, because they just announced today, February 9th, that they are rolling out age verification on their platform starting next month. Now, basically, it will automatically set all users' accounts to teen appropriate, basically, unless they demonstrate that they're adults. In other words, we're going to have to cough up ID. So, users who aren't verified as adults will not be able to access age restricted servers and channels and won't be able to speak in Discord's live stream like stage channels, and will see content filters for basically any content Discord detects as graphic or sensitive. They'll also be getting warning prompts for friend requests from potentially unfamiliar users, and DMs from unfamiliar users as well will automatically be filtered out into a separate inbox. And there's more there. But Discord basically is asking for essentially a government issued ID or facial recognition to essentially verify that you are an adult. And that's basically why we are talking about this today, because facial recognition is coming for absolutely everything. And as I was thinking about this throughout the day, I was thinking about it this way: facial recognition is no longer like just a niche or an optional technology. Just growing up basically in an era where cameras were rare, if ever around, to having them completely in our faces, not just because of our phones, but because businesses, governments, they're just being put up everywhere. It is no longer something that is reserved for the few. It's quietly embedded itself into our daily lives, right? Phones, airports. I travel quite a bit. I'm constantly getting caught on cameras, or I just have my picture taken going through customs, or even sometimes boarding a plane. Not to mention retail stores, office buildings, city streets, social media, law enforcement systems. I've done, segments on that like Flock and all of that. This is also happening without any kind of real opt out mechanism, right? I mean, or informed consent. We don't have any of that, or consistent legal safeguards on this. And so we're going to dive into this today because I think this is an important one. Because think about it this way: think about what biometrics are specific to your face. Your face is essentially becoming a permanent ID. And unlike passwords or ID cards, your face can't be rotated, can't be revoked, can't be replaced, and all of that. And once that facial template is essentially captured, your face is captured, copied, leaked, or sold, it's compromised forever. In the same way that we've always said, oh, once it gets on the internet, it never gets off. These things have a life of their own. Yeah, it's the same thing here. Participation is it's not voluntary. And I think that's an issue as well. Even people who never signed up for facial recognition are being affected, right? Cameras in public places, private security systems, retail loss prevention, workplace access controls, event venues. I mean, the Chinese are so good at it. They picked like one of their 10 most wanted out of a crowd of 50,000 at a concert venue. That's how accurate these things are getting. Not to mention social media tagging. You might not have Facebook, but you're in a picture at a wedding or wherever, and your friends start tagging you into it. Not to mention the government systems, border control, TSA, airlines, customs, all these kinds of things. And we don't opt in, right? We just simply exist. And then we go out in public. That's what we're talking about here. And our data is aggregated way beyond the original purpose of this. Facial recognition systems just don't really operate in isolation. I talked about this the other day with a legal ruling about this. They are increasingly being combined with our location data, behavioral analytics, purchase history, online profiles, government databases, and all of this. Essentially, what we have created is a structure that allows essentially the corporations and the governments of the world persistent identity tracking. It's not just ID and identifying who you are, right? So, what begins as security or convenience just essentially evolves into continuous surveillance by default. That's where we are at right now. And this power imbalance, I think, is growing. Right, because facial recognition disproportionately benefits, institutions like governments, corporations, employers, all of the various platforms like the discords of the world. Individuals, though, you and I, we don't have much, right? We've got limited visibility into where our data goes. We have basically a very limited ability to actually contest any kind of matches. People have been misidentified thanks to facial recognition and AI over the years. Some have landed in jail as a result of this, and that's a problem, right? We have very few mechanisms to audit or delete records. We basically have no leverage or virtually no leverage once systems are deployed. And going through the legal system is tough because legal protections are lagging. They're just not there. That's the reality of the situation. Most privacy and civil rights frameworks were designed basically to make sure that documents, databases, those kinds of things are essentially private. They weren't designed for biometro tracking, especially in public places operated by both private and public sectors. Right. So this goes across borders, jurisdictions, all of these kinds of things. And so I was thinking about what the possible solutions for this could be, right? I mean, we can't pretend that we can uninvent this. That horse and multiple horses at this point are out of the barn, right? So, the first point that I have that I was thinking about is I think that just coming from a cybersecurity and risk background, we have to treat facial data, meaning your face, my face, as it's basically being ingested, as high risk by default, and that may take legal framework around it. But if we start that, then our facial templates, could be classified as sensitive biometric data. So we could have strict limitations on its purpose, on its retention. Basically, we'd have the ability to delete, our biometric data, our face, all those kinds of things. And Europe is way ahead of the United States and other countries on this. Canada's pretty close, as is Japan, Australia, South Korea, etc. But United States is seriously lagging, right? Prohibition on secondary use without renewed consent is another thing as well. On top of it, and this is my second point, I think we need to mandate transparency and disclosure, right? Organizations using facial recognition should be required to disclose where it's used, for what purpose, whether identification or mere detection is actually occurring here, whether our data, our facial data, is stored there, is it shared, is it sold to somebody or another organization? Do we have the ability to challenge this or opt out? Recently, we saw essentially a grocery chain in the East Coast of the United States, Wegmans, start using essentially biometric cameras in their stores. They did a segment on this, like I want to say, like a month ago or so. And then the state of New York, the only reason why people knew about it is because New York has a law that requires basically a business like Wegmans to post a sign that says, "Hey, you're going to be recorded," and gives you basically just a notice and understanding of that. That's not everywhere. We don't have universal laws in the United States like other countries do. Look at Canada. They've got PIPEDA and some others, and that goes across all provinces of Canada. It's not just for Ontario or British Columbia or Quebec or whatever, right? We need federal wide laws on this. And my third point is we need to enforce human review, right? We have to have due process here, right? Automated facial matches should never be final decisions. That is so unbelievably important, especially as people have ended up in jail or misidentified in these databases. There has to be human verification. There has to be a threshold of confidence here to say, you know what, that looks kind of like Nick, but maybe it's Penn Jillette. I don't know. And if you were watching this, then you know exactly what I'm talking about here, right? So, on top of it, we have appeal mechanisms, audit trails, all these different kinds of things that we would need to have to protect our rights. We also, and this is my next point, is limit the use in public spaces, right? Public space facial recognition should be narrowly scoped, right? It should be legally authorized. There has to be a purpose for this as well, and then time bound. They can't keep our data, our face indefinitely, right? It should be independently audited by a third party that verifies that the government is actually practicing what they preach, right? So we have mass continuous surveillance, and that should not be the default, and it should not be a default trade-off for safety either. So my next point is that we need to create opt-out paths, like actual true meaningful opt-out paths, and wherever possible alternatives have to exist. Non-biometric authentication options, manual access procedures, all this kind of stuff. We have to have that clear signage that New York, is putting up, even more so than what New York is doing, so we have the ability to consent or at least understand. There can't be punitive penalties for refusing basically to opt in automatically to facial recognition, This is a huge problem. And finally, we also need to hold the vendors and deployers of this equally accountable, right? The responsibility has to apply to the technology providers, the flock cameras of the world, also to the organization that's deploying it. The entities that are benefiting from its use, are they selling this data? Are they doing something with it? Is it purely there and nobody's looking at it? They're just waiting for a break in and then they can review the tape? Like what does this look like? Liability cannot be outsourced to the algorithm. And that's what we tend to do. And that's one of the legal gray areas, I think, with artificial intelligence. Well, I didn't make the decision, the AI did. So what are we going to do? Sue OpenAI, sue Anthropic, sue the company that maybe got it as a closed, learning environment? We have to figure these things out. But the point is, technology is moving faster than laws can provide. And by virtue of that, we are caught in the middle of this because as technology increases, surveillance increases. And as surveillance increases, if the law cannot keep up, even a modicum of the way, we end up on the losing end of this. This is a big issue, and I don't think it's given enough credence. I mean, yes, we see it in the news on occasion, but with a million different things going on, and everybody focusing on whatever they're focusing on, this gets kind of fallen by the wayside, and I don't think it should. So that is your deep dive of the week. And quite frankly, I hope that people are listening. And I hope that, if you're out there and you're a lawmaker in some way, shape, or form, that you help. Because quite frankly, we all need it. And it benefits you too, because you're also a citizen. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, 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 I don't have to say private, informed, and secure. Take care.